The seamstress's tape measure fell to the floor with a soft clatter, and the woman's face went pale as she looked up at Jora, then down at the wedding dress laid across the table, then back up again with growing horror in her eyes. Jora stood perfectly still in the middle of the cramped fitting room, her green hands clasped before her, trying to make herself smaller even though she knew it was impossible. The dress had been commissioned 3 months ago, measured and cut and sewn with painstaking care, but somewhere between the ordering and the fitting, Jora had grown another 2 inches, and now the hem that should have brushed the floor would barely reach mid-calf. "I don't understand," the seamstress said, her voice tight. "You were measured. I have the measurements right here." She snatched up a leather-bound book from the counter, flipping through pages with trembling fingers. 6 feet and 1 inch, that's what we recorded. "I know," Jora said quietly, her tusks catching slightly on her lower lip. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to grow." The seamstress stared at her as if she'd announced she'd sprouted wings. "You're 22 years old. How are you still growing?" Jora wanted to explain that orc women sometimes had late growth spurts, that her mother had been the same way, shooting up 3 inches the year after her own wedding. But the seamstress was human, and likely didn't care about orc physiology, and moreover looked like she might faint if Jora said much more. So instead, she simply stood there, feeling the familiar shame creep up her neck, the sense that her body was wrong, too much, too large for the human world she was trying so desperately to fit into. Thomas Mercer was going to marry her in 3 days. Thomas, who barely came up to her shoulder. Thomas, who had courted her carefully and quietly for 8 months, who had defied his family and half the village of Thornmere to ask for her hand. Thomas, who deserved a bride who could fit into her wedding dress. "We'll have to take it apart," the seamstress said finally, but her tone suggested she'd rather burn it. "Add panels to the skirt. It will take time, and more fabric. That silk came all the way from the southern provinces, you know. It cost your intended a small fortune." "I can pay," Jora said quickly. "I have money from the mill work." The seamstress's mouth thinned. Everyone in Thornmere knew that Jora worked at the lumber mill on the edge of town, doing the heavy lifting that broke the backs of human men. They paid her half what they'd pay anyone else, and she took it gratefully because no one else would hire her at all. "The fabric will cost 6 silver, the seamstress said. "And my time for the rush work another 4, 10 silver. Nearly 2 months of wages." Jora's throat tightened, but she nodded. "I'll bring it tomorrow. See that you do." The seamstress turned away, dismissing her. Jora gathered her cloak from the hook by the door, pulling it tight around her shoulders even though the late spring day was warm. She wanted to be hidden, to be invisible, to be anything other than what she was. An orc woman who was too tall for her own wedding dress. The streets of Thornmere were busy with afternoon trade. Jora kept her head down as she walked, navigating between carts and merchants by the sound of their voices and the shadows they cast. She'd learned early that making eye contact only invited trouble. A group of children saw her and scattered, squealing. An old woman made a warning sign. A merchant pulled his wares closer to his stall as she passed, as if her mere presence might contaminate them. She was nearly to the bridge that would take her to the small cottage she rented on the far side of the river when she heard Thomas's voice. "Jora, wait." She turned, and there he was, jogging toward her through the crowd. Thomas Mercer, with his dark brown hair that fell into his eyes and his quick smile and his broad shoulders that came from years of working his family's farm. He was handsome by any measure and kind in a way that still surprised her, and when he reached her side he took her hand without hesitation, right there in the middle of the street where anyone could see. "I was hoping I'd catch you," he said, slightly breathless. "How did the fitting go?" Jora looked at their joined hands, his tan fingers wrapped around her green ones, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not well. His smile faded. What happened? She told him about the growth, about the dress, about the 10 silver she didn't have. With each word, she watched his face, waiting for the moment when he'd realize what a mistake he was making. Waiting for him to understand that marrying an orc woman meant a lifetime of problems like this, of things that didn't fit, of people who stared, of children who ran away screaming. But Thomas just listened, his thumb rubbing small circles on the back of her hand, and when she finished he said, 10 silver is robbery. That seamstress has been looking for an excuse to overcharge us since we placed the order. It's my fault, Jora said. I grew. You can't help your height. He said it so simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Come on, we're going to sort this out. Thomas, I can't ask you to, you're not asking, I'm offering. He tugged her hand gently, steering her back toward the center of town. Besides, I have an idea. They walked together through the streets, and Jora noticed the way people's eyes followed them. Some curious, some disgusted, some simply confused. She knew what they were thinking. Why would a good human man like Thomas Mercer tie himself to an orc? What could he possibly see in her? She'd asked him that once, late at night when they sat by the river, and she'd finally worked up the courage. He'd been quiet for a long time, and then he'd said, I see someone who gets up before dawn every day and works until her hands bleed. Someone who never complains, never asks for help, never expects anything from anyone. Someone who smiles at me like I'm the first good thing that's happened to her in years. And I think, if I could make her keep smiling like that for the rest of her life, I'd be the luckiest man in Thornmere. It had been the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, and she'd cried, much to her own embarrassment. Thomas led her past the seamstress's shop, past the market square, all the way to the northern edge of town, where his family's farm sprawled across 20 acres of good soil. The house was a sturdy 2-story structure with a thatched roof and flowers blooming in boxes beneath the windows. Thomas's mother had planted those flowers. Thomas's mother, who had not spoken to her son in 3 months, not since he'd announced his engagement. Thomas, Jora said, pulling back. I can't go in there. You're not going in, I am. He squeezed her hand. Wait here, I'll be quick. He disappeared through the front door before she could protest. Jora stood in the yard, feeling conspicuous and wrong. A few chickens pecked at the dirt near her feet, unafraid. Animals never minded her the way people did. She'd always found that both comforting and deeply sad. Raised voices drifted from inside the house. Thomas, and a woman, and another deeper voice that must be his father. Jora couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. Argument, anger, resistance. She closed her eyes. She shouldn't have let him bring her here. This was only making things worse. The door opened. Thomas emerged, his jaw tight, carrying a wooden chest under one arm. Behind him, in the doorway, stood a woman with graying hair and Thomas's same dark eyes. She looked at Jora, and Jora saw everything she expected. Disappointment, disgust, grief for the daughter-in-law she'd never have. Thomas, his mother said, please, think about what you're doing. I have, Ma. Every day for 8 months I've thought about it. He shifted the chest to his other arm, and I'm sure she's an orc. Her name is Jora. The children will be, his mother's voice broke. They'll be outcasts, neither human nor orc. They won't belong anywhere. Something fierce flashed across Thomas's face. Then we'll make a place where they belong. Jora and me together. That's what family does. He turned away from the house, from his mother, and walked back to Jora. She could see the hurt in his eyes, the way his shoulders were too stiff, the muscle jumping in his jaw. She wanted to tell him he didn't have to do this, didn't have to choose between her and his family, but the words stuck in her throat. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go." They walked back toward town in silence. The chest under Thomas's arm was clearly heavy, but he didn't complain. Finally, when they'd reached the bridge, Jora said, "What's in the box, my grandmother's things? She left them to me when she passed." "There's some jewelry, some silver pieces, a few other valuables." He stopped walking, set the chest down on the stone wall of the bridge. "I'm going to sell them. Should be more than enough to cover the dress and anything else we need for the wedding." Jora stared at him. "You can't do that. Those are your family heirlooms, and you're going to be my family." He said it firmly, like it was already settled, already real. "I don't need silver candlesticks and pearl necklaces. I need you in a dress that fits, smiling at me while we say our vows." The crack in her chest widened and she felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm not worth this," she whispered. "I'm not worth what you're giving up." Thomas's hand came up to cup her face, his palm warm against her cheek. "That's where you're wrong. You're worth everything." She wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it hurt. But she'd spent her whole life being told she was worth nothing, and those voices were loud in her head, drowning out his kindness. "What if I keep growing?" she asked. "What if I get taller and taller, and I can't fit through our doorway? And I can't sit in our chairs, and I'm always breaking things because I'm too big and clumsy. And you wake up one day and realize you made a terrible mistake." "Then I'll build bigger doorways," Thomas said. "I'll make stronger chairs, and I'll remind you every single day that you're not a mistake. You're the woman I love." The tears spilled over. She couldn't stop them. Thomas pulled her close, and she had to bend down to rest her head against his shoulder, and even that felt wrong, backwards, not the way it was supposed to be. But his arms were strong around her, and he didn't seem to mind, and maybe that was enough. "I'll go to the merchant quarter tomorrow," he said into her hair. "Sell the valuables. We'll have the money for the seamstress by evening." "I'll pay you back," Jora said. "Every copper, I swear it. It's not a loan. It's a wedding gift." He pulled back enough to look at her. "Stop trying to owe me, Jora. We're going to be married. What's mine is yours." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Your mother hates me." "She doesn't hate you. She's scared." He sighed. "She'll come around, eventually, and if she doesn't, that's her loss." They stayed on the bridge for a while longer, watching the river flow beneath them. Jora thought about Thomas's mother, about the fear in her voice when she'd talked about children who wouldn't belong. The truth was, Jora had thought about that too. Thought about it late at night when she couldn't sleep, imagined the little ones she and Thomas might have. Would they be green like her or tan like him? Would they have tusks? Would humans accept them? Would orcs? Or would they be caught between worlds just like she was, never quite fitting anywhere? "What if she's right?" Jora said softly. "About the children." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My grandmother used to tell me a story about two neighboring farms, one that grew wheat and one that grew barley. They'd been enemies for generations, fighting over water rights and property lines. Then one year, there was a drought. The wheat farmer's crops were dying. The barley farmer walked over one day and offered to share his well water. No payment, no bargain, just because it was the right thing to do. The wheat farmer accepted. The next spring, when floods came and destroyed the barley, the wheat farmer helped rebuild. And their children became friends, and their children's children intermarried, and eventually no one even remembered why the farms had been enemies in the first place." He turned to look at her. "The point is, things change. People change. We're not bound by the past unless we choose to be. Our children will make their own world. A better one, maybe. One where it doesn't matter if someone is human or orc. They'll belong because we'll teach them they belong. Because we'll love them and raise them to be strong and kind, and that will be enough." Jora wanted to believe that too. Wanted it more than anything, You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. He picked up the chest again. Come on, let's get some dinner. You're coming to my place and I'm cooking and you're not allowed to argue. Thomas lived in a small house on the eastern edge of his family's property, a place he'd built himself over the course of 2 years. It was humble but well made, with a stone fireplace and a loft for sleeping and windows that caught the morning sun. Jora had only been inside a handful of times, always nervous, always aware that she was technically not supposed to be alone with him before the wedding. But Thomas didn't seem concerned with propriety, and tonight, emotionally wrung out and grateful for his presence, neither was she. He made stew, something hearty with vegetables from his garden and smoked pork from the autumn slaughter. They ate at his small table, knees bumping beneath it, and Jora felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Here, in this space that Thomas had made, she could almost imagine a future where things worked out, where she wasn't always too much, too big, too wrong. "Tell me about your family," Thomas said as they ate. "You never talk about them." Jora stirred her stew, considering. "There's not much to tell. My clan lives in the Stone Peak Mountains about 2 weeks north of here. I haven't seen them in 4 years. Why did you leave?" "Because I didn't fit there either." She smiled without humor. "I was always too curious about humans. Too interested in your books, your farming methods, your way of life. The elders said I was betraying our traditions. My mother agreed, so I left. That must have been hard. It was necessary." She took a bite of stew, letting the warmth spread through her. "I thought if I came south, if I lived among humans, I could make a new life. But humans didn't want me either. Too orc for the humans, too human for the orcs. Story of my life." Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. "I want you." The simple certainty in his voice made her chest ache. "Why?" she asked, not for the first time. "Really, Thomas, why me?" He thought about it, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Last winter there was a bad storm. Ice everywhere and the road into town was impassable. I was trying to get to the mill to pick up lumber for a repair, and my cart wheel broke. I was stuck there in the freezing cold, and I thought I was going to have to abandon the cart and walk back, lose the deposit I'd paid on the lumber. Then you came along." Jora remembered. She'd been walking home from a shift at the mill, exhausted and half frozen herself. "You stopped," Thomas continued. "You didn't know me. You'd never spoken to me. But you stopped, and you lifted my entire cart. It must have weighed 300 pounds, and you held it up while I replaced the wheel. Your hands were shaking from the cold and the effort, but you didn't complain. And when I tried to pay you, you refused. You just said, 'Stay warm,' and walked away." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "I went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about you. About your strength, yes, but more than that. About your kindness. You had every reason to walk past me, every reason to let the human man who lived in a town that treated you like dirt struggle on his own. But you didn't. And I realized that's who you are, someone who helps even when it costs you. Someone who gives even when no one gives back." Jora's throat was tight. "That's just common decency." "Maybe, but common decency is rarer than it should be." He squeezed her hand. "I started watching for you after that, made excuses to go to the mill when I knew you'd be working. Learned your schedule. Finally worked up the courage to talk to you, and you looked at me like I was insane. Despite everything," Jora laughed. "I thought you were mocking me. Handsome farm boy striking up conversation with the orc girl. It seemed like a cruel joke." "I know. It took me 3 weeks to convince you I was serious." He grinned. "You're stubborn. I'm realistic. You're both." He stood, collecting their empty bowls. "But you're also wonderful and smart, and you laugh at my terrible jokes, and you make me want to be better than I am, so that's why. Because you're you, and I can't imagine anyone else." Jora sat at the table, watching him move around his kitchen, and felt something shift inside her. For so long, she'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Thomas to realize his mistake and walk away. But maybe, just maybe, he meant what he said. Maybe he really did see her the way he claimed. Maybe love wasn't about fitting perfectly into someone else's idea of right. Maybe it was about someone choosing you exactly as you were and deciding that was more than enough. Thomas finished cleaning up and then came to stand behind her chair. His hands settled on her shoulders, gentle and warm. "It's getting late. I should walk you home. I can walk myself." "I know you can, but I want to." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, the gesture so casual and affectionate that it made her want to cry again. "Humor me." They walked through the darkening evening, the first stars beginning to appear overhead. Jora's cottage was small and drafty, but it was hers, paid for with her own wages. Thomas walked her to the door and then lingered, like he didn't quite want to leave. "Tomorrow I'll sell the valuables," he said. "Then we'll take the money to that seamstress and make sure she understands that we expect the dress to be perfect. And if she gives us any trouble, we'll find someone else." "There is no one else. She's the only seamstress in Thornmere who agreed to make a dress for an orc." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then we'll go to Riverside or Millbrook, or all the way to the capital if we have to." "You're going to have a wedding dress that fits, Jora, I promise." She believed him. Against all odds, all her years of disappointment and rejection, she believed him. "Thank you," she whispered. He kissed her, soft and lingering, and then pulled back with visible reluctance. 3 more days. Then you're stuck with me forever." "I can think of worse fates," he laughed, and the sound warmed her from the inside out. "Get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow." She watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkness, and then went inside and sat on her narrow bed and tried to make sense of everything she was feeling. Fear, yes. Worry about the dress, about the wedding, about the future. But beneath all that, something else. Hope. Fragile and new, but growing stronger. The next morning, Jora woke early and went to the mill as usual. The work was back-breaking, hauling logs from the cutting floor to the storage yard, but she'd grown used to it. The mill owner barely acknowledged her presence, just pointed to the day's pile and expected her to get started. She worked through the morning, her mind elsewhere, thinking about Thomas and the chest of valuables, and whether the seamstress would keep her word about the alterations. At midday, one of the other workers, a young human man named Peter, approached her during the break. He usually kept his distance, like most of the humans at the mill, but today he seemed agitated. "Is it true?" he asked without preamble. "You're marrying Thomas Mercer?" Jora straightened, immediately wary. "Yes," Peter shook his head. "Poor bastard, he doesn't know what he's getting into. Excuse me, come on. Everyone knows orcs are violent, savage, it's in your blood." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "How long before you lose your temper and hurt him? How long before you show your true nature?" Jora felt her tusks press against her lip as her jaw tightened. "I would never hurt Thomas." "That's what you say now, but orcs can't control themselves. Everyone knows it." Peter's eyes were hard. "He's making a mistake, and someone needs to tell him before it's too late." "Then tell him," Jora said evenly. "He won't listen, but you're welcome to try." "Maybe I will. Maybe a lot of us will." Peter glanced over his shoulder at the other workers who were watching with interest. "There are people in Thornmere who don't want your kind here, who don't think it's right, humans and orcs mixing. If Thomas is too foolish to see the problem, maybe we need to make it clear to him." A chill ran down Jora's spine. "Are you threatening me? I'm warning you, call off the wedding. Leave Thornmere, go back to your own kind." Peter's voice was quiet, almost reasonable, which somehow made it worse. "If you care about Thomas at all, you'll do the right thing." He walked away before she could respond. Jora stood frozen, her heart pounding. She'd known there was prejudice, had felt it every day since she'd arrived in Thornmere. But this was different. This was active hostility, the promise of real consequences. She tried to finish her shift, but her hands were shaking. Finally, the mill owner told her to leave early, that she was moving too slow and getting in the way. She didn't argue, just collected her small wage and hurried out. Thomas was in the market square when she found him, negotiating with a jeweler over the contents of his grandmother's chest. The chest was open on the counter, revealing delicate silver pieces and a strand of pearls that gleamed in the afternoon light. The jeweler looked skeptical, examining each piece with a critical eye. "Thomas," Jora said, breathless from hurrying, "I need to talk to you." He looked up, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" She told him about Peter, about the warning, about the thinly veiled threat. With each word, Thomas's face grew darker. He said that. Thomas's voice was low and dangerous in a way Jora had never heard before. "He threatened you. He said there are people who don't want us to marry, that we should call it off." "Absolutely not." Thomas turned to the jeweler. "How much for the lot?" The jeweler named a price. It was lower than it should have been, and they both knew it, but Thomas didn't argue. He took the coins, shoved them into his pouch, and grabbed Jora's hand. "Where are we going?" she asked as he pulled her through the market. "To talk to Peter." "Thomas, no, it will only make things worse." "Worse than threatening my future wife? I don't think so." But he stopped walking, took a breath, seemed to force himself to calm down. "You're right, confronting him won't help, but we're not calling off the wedding and we're not leaving Thornmere. This is our home. We have as much right to be here as anyone." "Do we?" Jora asked quietly. "Maybe Peter is right. Maybe I should go." Thomas turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to grip her arms. "Listen to me. Peter is a small-minded fool who's scared of anything different. There are always going to be people like him. But there are also people like me, and like old widow Hess who always waves when she sees you, and like Marcus at the bakery who gives you the day-old bread at a discount. Not everyone in Thornmere is an enemy. Enough of them are. Then we'll prove them wrong." His grip tightened, urgent. "We'll get married, and we'll build a life, and we'll show them that love doesn't care about species or tradition, or what narrow-minded people think is proper. We'll show them that different doesn't mean wrong." Jora wanted to believe him. But she was also practical, and she'd lived with prejudice long enough to know how deep it ran. "What if they hurt you because of me? What if your farm suffers, or people stop trading with you, or worse? Then I'll handle it. But I'm not losing you because some people can't open their minds." He pulled her close, right there in the middle of the market with people staring. "You're it for me, Jora. You're everything. And if the world has a problem with that, the world can learn to live with disappointment." She laughed despite herself, a wet, shaky sound. "You're impossible." "I'm determined. There's a difference." He kissed her forehead. "Come on. Let's go pay off that seamstress and make sure your dress is perfect." They went to the seamstress's shop together, and Thomas counted out the coins with a firmness that brooked no argument. The seamstress took the money, her mouth pinched, and promised the dress would be ready the morning of the wedding. "It will fit," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. "Perfectly. Do you understand?" The seamstress nodded stiffly. "It will fit." They left the shop, and Thomas seemed to relax slightly. "See, handled. You're very good at handling things," Jora observed. "I'm good at protecting what's mine." He glanced at her. "And you're mine whether you like it or not." "I like it," she admitted quietly. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, walking through the fields outside of town, talking about the wedding and the future and all the small details that needed managing. Thomas wanted to plant a garden behind his house, expand it to include herbs and medicinal plants. Jora wanted to learn to cook better, to make the kinds of meals Thomas described his mother making when he was young. They talked about maybe getting a goat, or chickens, or a dog to keep them company. Small dreams, domestic and ordinary, and Jora felt herself falling more deeply in love with each word. As the sun began to set, Thomas walked her home again. At her door, he hesitated. 2 more days, he said. Then you're moving into my house and I get to wake up next to you every morning. Your house is very small, Jora pointed out. I might not fit. Then I'll add a room, or build you a new bed, or we'll sleep outside under the stars. He grinned. We'll figure it out. She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, gratitude and love and fear and hope all tangled together. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. 2 more days, she echoed. I can't wait. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. Jora took the day off from the mill, spending it instead cleaning her cottage and packing her few belongings. She didn't have much. Some clothes, a few books she'd managed to buy or trade for, a wooden carving her father had made when she was a child. It all fit into a single trunk. Looking at it, she felt a pang of sadness for the life she was leaving behind, even though it had been lonely and difficult. This cottage had been her refuge, her proof that she could survive on her own. But now she was choosing something else. Choosing to trust Thomas, to build a life with him, to believe that maybe she didn't have to be alone anymore. That evening, there was a knock at her door. Jora opened it to find Thomas standing there with a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." She unwrapped the paper carefully and inside found a dress. Not her wedding dress, but a simple gown in deep blue with long sleeves and a hem that looked like it might actually reach her ankles. She held it up, her eyes widening. "Where did you get this?" "I commissioned it. From a seamstress in Riverside. I went there yesterday after we left the shop in town." He looked almost shy. "I wanted you to have something nice to wear, something that fit properly. I know the wedding dress is important, but I thought you might want something for every day too." Jora stared at the dress, then at Thomas, and felt tears sting her eyes for what felt like the 100th time in 2 days. "You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. Try it on. Make sure it fits." She changed behind the screen in the corner of her cottage, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled on the dress. The fabric was soft, well made, and when she looked down, she saw that the hem did indeed brush the floor. The sleeves covered her wrists. The bodice was neither too tight nor too loose. It fit. Perfectly, beautifully it fit. She stepped out from behind the screen and Thomas's face lit up. "It's perfect," he said softly. "You look beautiful." Jora turned in a slow circle, feeling the skirt swirl around her ankles. She'd never owned a dress that fit this well. Never had clothes that didn't require rolling up sleeves or hemming skirts or constant adjustments. She felt, for the first time in her life, like her body was the right size. Like she wasn't too much. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." Thomas crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "Get used to it. I plan on spending the rest of my life being kind to you." They stood there in her small cottage, holding each other as the light faded outside. Jora thought about Peter's warning, about all the people in Thornmere who didn't want them to be together. She thought about Thomas's mother, about the pain in her voice when she'd talked about grandchildren who wouldn't belong. She thought about her own family, far away in the mountains, who had cast her out for wanting something different. But then she thought about Thomas, about the way he looked at her like she was precious, about the dress that fit and the life he was offering and the future they could build together. And she decided that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Maybe love was enough. Maybe it had to be. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Jora woke in her cottage for the last time, nerves fluttering in her stomach. Today she would marry Thomas Mercer. Today, everything would change. She washed and dressed carefully in the blue gown Thomas had given her, then made her way to the seamstress's shop as they'd arranged. The wedding dress would be there, altered and ready. Thomas would meet her at the small chapel on the edge of town at noon. The seamstress was waiting when Jora arrived, but her expression was troubled. She held the wedding dress in her arms, and Jora's heart sank. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing is wrong with the dress," the seamstress said. "It's finished. The alterations are done, and it will fit you perfectly." "Then what?" "There was an incident last night. Some men came by the shop. They were drunk, angry. They said things about you, about the wedding." The seamstress's voice dropped. "They said if I gave you this dress, they'd burn down my shop." Jora felt cold all over. "Did they say who they were?" "I recognized one of them, Peter Grantham, who works at the mill." The seamstress looked genuinely distressed now. "I don't agree with them, I don't, but this shop is my livelihood. If they burn it down, I have nothing." "So you're not going to give me the dress?" "I can't." The words came out as almost a sob. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I can't lose everything." Jora stood very still, processing this. She'd expected obstacles, expected prejudice and hostility and people making things difficult. But somehow she hadn't expected this. Someone terrorizing a shopkeeper, threatening her livelihood, all to prevent an orc woman from having a wedding dress. "I understand," Jora said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." She turned to leave, but the seamstress called after her. "Wait, please. Take this." She pressed a small pouch into Jora's hand. "It's the money Thomas paid, all of it. I don't feel right keeping it after this." Jora took the pouch, numb. She walked out of the shop in a daze, her mind whirling. The wedding was in 3 hours. She had no dress. She couldn't tell Thomas, couldn't bear to see the anger and disappointment in his face, couldn't stand the thought of him confronting Peter and making everything worse. She walked aimlessly through Thornmere, the pouch of coins heavy in her hand. People stared as she passed, and she wondered how many of them knew. How many had heard about Peter's threats? How many agreed with him? Finally, she found herself at the chapel. It was a small stone building, old and weathered, with wildflowers growing around the foundation. The door was unlocked, and Jora slipped inside, grateful for the cool darkness and the silence. She sat in one of the pews and tried not to cry. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She was supposed to be preparing, getting ready, feeling excited and nervous and joyful. Instead, she felt defeated, felt like maybe Peter was right, maybe she should just leave. Maybe loving Thomas wasn't enough if the world was determined to tear them apart. "Jora," she looked up. Thomas stood in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun. He looked confused to see her there. "What are you doing here? I thought you were getting the dress." She couldn't lie to him, couldn't pretend everything was fine. So she told him what had happened about Peter and the threats and the seamstress's fear. With each word, she watched his expression grow darker. When she finished, Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Where is Peter now?" "Thomas, no, please don't make this worse." "Worse? He threatened violence against an innocent woman to prevent you from having a wedding dress. How much worse can it get?" Thomas's hands were clenched into fists. "I'm done being reasonable. I'm done pretending that if we're just patient and kind, people like Peter will come around. They won't, and I'm not going to let them ruin this day for you." He turned to leave, but Jora caught his arm. "Wait, please. Don't go after him. It won't help." "Then what do you suggest?" Thomas asked, his voice raw with frustration. "We just let him win. Let him intimidate us into calling off the wedding." "No," Jora said slowly, an idea forming. "We get married anyway, right now, like this." Thomas stared at her. "Without the dress, without the dress, without the guests, without any of the traditional things. Just us and the priest and our vows." She stood, taking his hands in hers. "You said the dress didn't matter. You said you just wanted me in a dress that fit, smiling at you while we said our vows. Well, this dress fits. She gestured to the blue gown he'd given her. And I'm here, and I love you. Isn't that enough? Thomas looked at her, and she saw the anger slowly drain from his face, replaced by something softer. You'd really marry me right now, without all the ceremony and celebration. I'd marry you in a barn wearing a flour sack if that's what it took. She managed a smile. The wedding isn't about the dress, Thomas. It's about us choosing each other. So let's choose each other. Today, right now, before anyone else can try to stop us. A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. You're brilliant, you know that. I'm practical. That too. He kissed her quick and fierce. Wait here. I'm going to get Father Benedict. He ran out of the chapel, leaving Jora alone with her thoughts. She looked down at the blue dress, at the way it fit her perfectly, and thought about Thomas commissioning it, about him thinking of her comfort and happiness even in the middle of everything else. She thought about his mother's tears and Peter's threats and all the obstacles they still faced. But she also thought about Thomas's hand in hers, about his steady belief that they could make this work, about the life they could build if they were brave enough to try. 10 minutes later, Thomas returned with Father Benedict, an elderly man who'd served the chapel for 40 years. He looked confused but willing. Thomas tells me you want to marry immediately, he said, studying Jora. Is this true? Yes, Jora said firmly, if you're willing to perform the ceremony. Father Benedict was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I've known Thomas since he was a boy. He's a good man, honest and hardworking. If he says he wants to marry you and you want to marry him, I see no reason to delay. He moved to the front of the chapel, opening his prayer book. Shall we begin? It was the simplest wedding ceremony Jora could have imagined. No guests, no flowers, no music. Just her and Thomas standing before Father Benedict in an empty chapel, speaking vows that felt both ancient and urgently new. Do you, Thomas Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Father Benedict asked. I do, Thomas said, his voice strong and clear. I take her in joy and in struggle, in celebration and in hardship. I promise to stand beside her, to honor her, to love her for all the days of my life. And do you, Jora Mossgrove, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Jora's voice shook, but she pushed the words out. I do. I take him in gratitude and hope. I promise to be worthy of his love, to build a life with him, to stand strong when things are hard. I promise to love him with everything I am. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Father Benedict smiled. You may kiss your bride. Thomas pulled her close and kissed her, and Jora felt something settle into place inside her chest. They were married. Whatever happened now, whatever obstacles they faced, they would face them together. As husband and wife, when they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Father Benedict chuckled. Well then, that's done. I'll file the marriage record with the town clerk this afternoon. Congratulations to you both. They thanked him and walked out of the chapel into the bright midday sun. Jora felt light-headed, almost disbelieving. They were married. She was Thomas's wife. Thomas was her husband. Well, wife, Thomas said, grinning at her. What would you like to do now? I don't know. I didn't plan beyond this moment. Then allow me to suggest something. He took her hand and started walking, leading her away from the chapel toward the edge of town. I think we should go home, our home. And we should spend the rest of the day celebrating in private, away from people like Peter and their small-minded hatred. Just you and me, starting our lives together. That sounds perfect, Jora said softly. They walked hand in hand through Thornmere, and Jora noticed the stares, the whispers. By now word had probably spread about Peter's threats, about the seamstress refusing to give her the dress. People probably expected them to cancel, to give up. Instead, here they were, newly married, defiant in the face of all the prejudice and hostility. When they reached Thomas's house, their house now, he swept her up in his arms and carried her over the threshold. Jora laughed, startled. "You don't have to do that. I'm too heavy." "Nonsense. You're exactly the right weight for carrying." He set her down gently inside, then closed the door behind them. "There. Now we're officially home." Jora looked around the small house with new eyes. This was her home now, her and Thomas's. The thought filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No regrets," he murmured into her hair. "Not a single one. Good. Because I have plans for us, wife. Many, many plans." She turned in his arms, looping her own around his neck. "Oh, what kind of plans?" "The kind that involve spending a great deal of time in each other's company, getting to know each other even better, building the life we talked about." He kissed her nose. "Also possibly adding that extra room to the house, because you're right, it is a bit small." "We'll manage," Jora said. "We always do." They spent the afternoon together, talking and laughing and reveling in the newness of being married. Thomas cooked dinner, something simple but delicious, and they ate by the fire as the sun set outside. Jora felt a peace she'd never known before, a sense of rightness that filled her from head to toe. Later, as they lay together in Thomas's their bed, Jora said quietly, "Do you think Peter will cause more trouble?" Thomas was silent for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. "Probably. He and people like him don't give up easily, but we'll handle it together." "I'm scared," Jora admitted. "Not for me, for you. I don't want you to suffer because of me." "Hey." Thomas shifted so he could look at her in the dim light. "Listen to me. Marrying you is not suffering. Marrying you is the best thing I've ever done. And whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face, we'll face them as a team. You and me, understand?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "I love you. I love you too, so much." He kissed her forehead. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we start building our life together. For real this time." Jora closed her eyes, feeling safe and warm in Thomas's arms. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she belonged. Not because she'd changed herself to fit someone else's expectations, but because someone had chosen to make space for her exactly as she was. Thomas had seen her, all of her, and decided she was enough, more than enough, and that made all the difference. The next week passed in a blur of domesticity and quiet joy. Jora moved her belongings into Thomas's house, arranging her few possessions among his. They fell into a routine. Thomas worked his farm while Jora continued at the mill, though she was already making plans to find other work, perhaps helping Thomas with the farm full-time. In the evenings they cooked together, talked about their days, made plans for the future. But the peace didn't last. 8 days after their wedding, Jora came home from the mill to find Thomas in the front yard, staring at something on the ground. As she got closer, she saw what it was: their small vegetable garden, completely destroyed. Plants torn up by the roots, trampled into the mud. Someone had taken the time and effort to ruin every single thing they'd planted. "Thomas," she said softly. He looked at her, his face carefully blank. It was Peter and his friends. Old Marcus saw them. Said they came by this afternoon, laughing about teaching the orc lover a lesson. Jora felt sick. "I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. This isn't your fault." Thomas's jaw was tight. "But I'm done ignoring it. I'm going to the town magistrate. This is destruction of property, intimidation, harassment. There are laws against this." "Will the magistrate care? When it's an orc they're defending, he'd better care. Because if he doesn't, I'll make enough noise that the regional governor hears about it." Thomas turned to her, his eyes fierce. "I won't let them do this to us, Jora. I won't let them drive you away or make our lives miserable. We have a right to live here in peace." He was true to his word. The next day, he went to Magistrate Holden, a stern man who'd served Thornmere for 20 years. Jora went with him, nervous but determined to stand beside her husband. Magistrate Holden listened to Thomas's complaint with an impassive expression. When Thomas finished, the magistrate steepled his fingers and said, "You're certain it was Peter Grantham?" Old Marcus saw him. "He's willing to testify." "And what would you have me do, Thomas? Arrest a young man over some damaged vegetables?" "I'd have you enforce the law," Thomas said evenly. "This isn't just about vegetables. It's about intimidation and harassment. Peter has been threatening my wife since before our wedding. He terrorized the seamstress into refusing to give Jora her wedding dress. Now he's destroyed our property. What's next? Does he have to burn down our house before you take this seriously?" The magistrate's gaze flicked to Jora, then back to Thomas. "Your wife is an orc. I'm aware. Orcs and humans have been enemies for generations. There are people in this town who remember the border raids who lost family to orc attacks. You can't expect them to simply accept one living among us, marrying one of our own." Thomas's hands clenched into fists on the magistrate's desk. "Those raids were 20 years ago. Jora wasn't even born yet. She's done nothing wrong except exist, and that's not a crime. Or is it? Is that what you're telling me? That orcs don't have rights in Thornmere? I'm telling you that you made a choice when you married her, a choice that has consequences." Magistrate Holden leaned back in his chair. "I'll talk to Peter. Warn him to leave you alone. But beyond that, I suggest you learn to live with the fact that not everyone in this town is going to welcome your union. That's it. You'll warn him. That's all I can do without solid evidence. And even if I had evidence, do you really want to make an enemy of half the town by pursuing this?" "Think carefully, Thomas. You still have to live here." Thomas stood abruptly. "Come on, Jora, we're leaving." Outside the magistrate's office, Thomas paced back and forth, his frustration evident. Jora watched him, her heart aching. "It's like he doesn't even care," Thomas said. "Like because you're an orc, you don't deserve justice." "Maybe I don't," Jora said quietly. "Not here, not in their eyes." "That's not true. You deserve—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to do. I thought the law would protect us. I thought if we just followed the rules, lived our lives, people would leave us alone. But they won't, will they?" "No," Jora said. "They won't. And I don't want you to keep fighting battles you can't win because of me. Maybe we should leave Thornmere. Go somewhere else, somewhere people don't know us." Thomas stopped pacing and looked at her. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to be happy. I want us to have a life where we're not constantly under attack." "Then we stay," Thomas said firmly, "because running away won't solve anything. There will always be people like Peter, no matter where we go. The only way to prove them wrong is to stay and build the life we want right here in spite of them. Even if it's hard, especially if it's hard." He crossed to her and took her hands. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Jora. And I'm not afraid of people who try to tear us down. We'll replant the garden. We'll fix whatever they break. We'll keep showing up, keep living our lives, until they realize we're not going anywhere." Jora wanted to believe him, wanted to have his faith and determination. But she'd lived with prejudice for so long, had learned that sometimes the world just didn't want you, no matter how hard you tried. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. Small acts of vandalism at first, tools going missing from Thomas's shed, fences knocked down, supplies stolen. Then larger things. Someone let Thomas's chickens out of their coop and half of them disappeared before they could be found. A section of his wheat field was trampled, destroying weeks of growth. Each time, Thomas reported it to the magistrate. Each time, nothing was done. Jora watched her husband grow more and more tired, more frustrated. She saw the toll it was taking on him, the weight of fighting a battle that seemed unwinnable, and she hated it. Hated that loving her meant he had to suffer. Hated that her presence in his life was causing him pain. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Jora came home to find Thomas sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The day's harvest was supposed to have been good, but someone had gotten to it first, stealing half the yield. "Thomas," she said softly. He looked up, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," he admitted. "Every day it's something new. I'm falling behind on work because I'm constantly having to repair and replace and deal with their sabotage. If this keeps up, I won't be able to make enough to pay the farm taxes. We could lose everything." Jora sat down across from him. "Then maybe it's time to consider leaving." "I don't want to leave. This is my home, my family's farm, I know, but is it worth losing everything? Is being stubborn about staying worth destroying your livelihood?" She reached across the table and took his hand. "I love you, Thomas, and because I love you, I can't watch them tear you apart. If leaving means you keep your dignity and your farm, then we should leave." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "If we leave, they win. They get what they wanted. They drive us out through intimidation and harassment, and they learn that as long as they make life miserable enough, they can force anyone out. Is that the lesson you want them to learn? I want you to be happy. I'll be happy when we can live in peace, when we can work and build our life without constantly looking over our shoulders." He squeezed her hand. "But maybe you're right. Maybe we can't do that here. Not with Peter and his friends determined to drive us out. Not with the magistrate unwilling to help. So we'll go, let me think about it." Thomas stood, suddenly restless. "I need to check the barn, make sure nothing else has been damaged. I'll be back." He left, and Jora sat alone at the table, feeling helpless. She hated this. Hated watching Thomas struggle. Hated being the reason his life had become so difficult. An idea began to form in her mind. A terrible, painful idea, but maybe the only solution. That night, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Jora lay awake thinking. She thought about everything that had happened since their wedding. The vandalism, the stolen goods, the exhaustion in Thomas's eyes. She thought about what his mother had said about how his children would be outcasts. She thought about Peter's warning about how she didn't belong. Maybe they were right. Maybe loving someone wasn't enough when the world was determined to tear you apart. In the morning, while Thomas was out in the fields, Jora packed a small bag. She left most of her things, took only the essentials. Then she sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter, her hand shaking as she formed the words. "Thomas, I love you more than I can express. You have been kinder to me than anyone in my entire life. You've given me hope and joy and a sense of belonging I never thought I'd find. But I can't watch you lose everything because of me. I can't be the reason your life falls apart. Peter and the others will never stop as long as I'm here. As long as I'm in Thornmere, you'll be a target, so I'm leaving. Not because I don't love you, but because I do. Because you deserve a life free from constant harassment. Because you deserve to keep your farm and your dignity and your future. Please don't try to find me. I'm going back to my clan in the Stone Peak Mountains. I'll be safe there. And you'll be safe here once I'm gone. Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me even when the world said you shouldn't. I'll carry that with me always. Love." Jora. She left the letter on the table where Thomas would find it when he came in for lunch. Then she picked up her bag and walked out the door, not letting herself look back. The walk north out of Thornmere felt like the longest of her life. Every step took her further from Thomas, from the life they'd started building together. But it also took her closer to the mountains, to her clan, to the place she'd come from. Maybe this was how it was always supposed to end. Maybe she'd been foolish to think she could have something different. She'd been walking for about 3 hours when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned and her heart sank. It was Peter, along with 2 other men from town. They reined in their horses, surrounding her on the road. "Well, well," Peter said, a cruel smile on his face. "The orc bride finally realizes she's not welcome, running away with your tail between your legs." Jora didn't respond, just tried to move past them. But one of the other men maneuvered his horse to block her path. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked. "Away from Thornmere. Isn't that what you wanted?" "Oh, it is," Peter said. "But we thought we'd escort you, make sure you really leave. Make sure you understand that if you ever come back, things will be much worse for you and your foolish husband." "I'm not coming back," Jora said quietly. "I'm leaving, just let me go." "Not until we're sure you've learned your lesson." Peter dismounted and the other 2 followed. They advanced on her, and Jora took a step back, her heart pounding. She'd never been a fighter. She was strong, yes, but she'd always avoided violence, always tried to diffuse situations rather than escalate them. But now, facing 3 angry men on an empty road, she realized she might not have a choice. "Please," she said, hating the way her voice shook. "I'm leaving. There's no need for this." "There's every need," Peter said. "You came here and disrupted everything. Made Thomas turn against his own people. Made him believe that an orc could ever be worth more than a human woman. Someone needs to teach you your place." He grabbed her arm, and Jora reacted instinctively. She yanked free, her superior strength easily breaking his grip, and then shoved him backward. He stumbled, falling to the ground, and the other 2 men rushed at her. Jora defended herself as best she could, but she was outnumbered. They got her to the ground, and then Peter was back, his face twisted with rage, and he pulled out a knife. "Maybe we'll leave Thomas a message," he said. "A reminder of what happens when you mix with monsters." Jora braced herself for the pain, but it didn't come. Instead, there was a shout, and suddenly Peter was being hauled backward, thrown to the ground. Thomas appeared, fury in his eyes, and he punched Peter hard enough that the man's head snapped back. "Get away from my wife," Thomas roared. The other 2 men released Jora and scrambled backward. Thomas helped her up, quickly checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "I'm fine." "Thomas, what are you doing here? I came home for lunch and found your letter. I saddled the horse and rode after you." He turned back to Peter, who was groaning on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. "You threatened my wife. You attacked her on the road. That's assault, and I'm bringing charges against all 3 of you." "The magistrate won't do anything," Peter spat. "He doesn't care about your orc whore." Thomas moved so fast Jora almost didn't see it. He grabbed Peter by the collar and hauled him up, getting right in his face. "That's my wife you're talking about, and if the magistrate won't defend her, I'll go over his head. I'll go to the regional governor, to the capital if I have to. I'll make enough noise that everyone knows what you did. How you terrorized an innocent woman, destroyed property, committed assault, and we'll see if your father's money can protect you when the whole province is watching." He shoved Peter away in disgust, then turned to Jora. "Come on. We're going home." "Thomas, I can't. I left for a reason. As long as I'm there, you'll never have peace." "I don't want peace if it means losing you." He took her hands, his grip fierce. "Do you really think I'm just going to let you walk away after everything we've been through?" "I meant my vows, Jora, for better or worse, through hardship and joy. I'm not giving up on us because some narrow-minded fools can't accept that we love each other. But your farm can be rebuilt, replanted, repaired, but you—" he cupped her face in his hands. "You're irreplaceable. You're everything. And if you think I'm going to choose land over you, you don't know me at all." Jora felt tears stream down her face. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me. The only thing I'll lose is everything that matters if you leave." He pulled her close, holding her tight. "Please, Jora, come home. Let me fight for us. Let us fight for us together." She held on to him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the letter she'd written, about her plan to go back to the mountains, to a clan that had cast her out for wanting something different. She thought about the life she and Thomas had started building, messy and difficult but also full of love and hope. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I'll come home." Thomas let out a breath that sounded like relief and pain all mixed together. "Thank you, thank you." Behind them, Peter and his friends were getting to their feet, preparing to leave. Thomas turned to them one last time. "If you ever come near my wife again, if you ever set foot on my property, if you so much as look at her wrong, I will end you. Do you understand me? I'll use every resource I have, every connection, every bit of influence I can muster, and I will make your lives a living hell. Are we clear?" Peter, holding his bleeding nose, glared but nodded. "Good. Now get out of my sight." The three men mounted their horses and rode off. Thomas and Jora stood alone on the road, holding each other. "How did you know where to find me?" Jora asked. "I didn't, not really. I just rode north, hoping to catch up. When I saw their horses, I pushed mine faster." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes intense. "Don't ever do that again. Don't ever think that leaving is the answer. We're a team, Jora. We face things together. I was trying to protect you. And I'm trying to protect you, so we're even." He managed a smile. "Come on, let's go home. For real this time, no more running." They rode back to Thornmere together, sharing Thomas's horse. When they reached the town, people stared, but Thomas stared right back, daring anyone to say something. No one did. At home, Thomas helped Jora down from the horse and then unpacked her bag, putting everything back where it belonged. "You're staying," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." The next day, Thomas made good on his threat. He rode to the neighboring town of Riverside and sent a formal complaint to the regional governor's office, detailing everything that had happened. The harassment, the vandalism, the assault on the road. He named Peter and his accomplices, and he made it clear that Magistrate Holden had failed to provide adequate protection or justice. Word spread quickly. Within a week, an official from the governor's office arrived in Thornmere to investigate. Peter and his friends were questioned, as were Jora and Thomas, old Marcus, and several other witnesses. The magistrate was also called to account for his inaction. The official, a stern woman named Catherine who'd seen her share of frontier justice, was thorough. She spent 3 days gathering testimony, examining evidence, talking to people. And at the end of it, she called a town meeting in the chapel. "I've completed my investigation," Catherine announced to the assembled townspeople. "And I've found substantial evidence of harassment, intimidation, and assault against Jora Mercer, as well as destruction of property belonging to Thomas Mercer. Peter Grantham and his associates will face criminal charges. They'll be tried in the provincial court, and if convicted, they'll serve time and pay restitution." A murmur ran through the crowd. Peter, standing in the back with his father, looked pale. "Furthermore," Catherine continued, "I've found that Magistrate Holden failed in his duty to protect all citizens of Thornmere, regardless of their race. He's been removed from his position, effective immediately. A new magistrate will be appointed by the governor's office." Magistrate Holden stood abruptly. "You can't do this. I've served this town for 20 years. And in those 20 years, you should have learned that the law applies to everyone, orcs included." Catherine's voice was hard. "Your removal is final." She turned to address the whole room. "Let me be clear. Thornmere, like all towns in this province, is subject to the laws of the realm. Those laws protect every citizen, human and orc alike. Interspecies marriages are legal. Harassment based on race is illegal. If anyone in this town has a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with the governor, but I promise you, you won't like his response." She looked directly at Thomas and Jora. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, I apologize on behalf of the province for the injustice you've suffered. You have every right to live here in peace, and the law will protect that right going forward." The meeting ended in stunned silence. People filed out slowly, many of them glancing at Jora and Thomas with new expressions. Not acceptance, not exactly, but a wary acknowledgement. A recognition that maybe, just maybe, things were changing in the weeks that followed. Life in Thornmere slowly improved. Peter and his friends were tried and convicted, sentenced to 6 months of labor, and ordered to pay substantial restitution to Thomas and Jora. The new magistrate, a fair-minded man named William Cross, made it clear that he would enforce the law equally for all citizens. People still stared. Some still disapproved, but the open hostility faded. Merchants served Jora without complaint. Children stopped running away when they saw her. Slowly, cautiously, the town began to accept that Thomas and Jora were there to stay. Thomas's mother even came to visit, 3 months after the wedding. She stood at their door, looking nervous and apologetic. "I was wrong," she said without preamble. "I was scared and narrow-minded, and I hurt both of you. I'm sorry." Thomas looked at his mother for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." They sat together in the small house, drinking tea, and Thomas's mother talked about her fears and her grief, and her slow realization that she was letting prejudice steal her son from her. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she said to Jora, "but I hope maybe we can start over. I'd like to know my daughter-in-law." Jora, who'd spent so long believing she'd never be accepted, felt tears sting her eyes. "I'd like that too. It wasn't perfect, reconciliation never was, but it was a start. The seasons turned." Summer gave way to autumn, and Thomas and Jora brought in their harvest together, the fields finally yielding without sabotage. They sold their crops at the market, saved their earnings, made plans for the future. Thomas began building that extra room he'd promised, expanding the house to be more comfortable for both of them. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day's work, Thomas said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About the future. About what comes next for us." He turned to look at her. "I want children, Jora. I want a family with you. But I know that's a big step, and I know there are challenges. So I wanted to ask, is that something you want too?" Jora thought about Thomas's mother's words about children who wouldn't belong. But she also thought about Thomas's faith, about his belief that they could build a better world, about love being enough to overcome prejudice given time and determination. "Yes," she said, "I want that too. I'm scared, but I want it." "We'll figure it out together," Thomas said, taking her hand. Just like everything else. 2 years later, Jora gave birth to a daughter. She had Thomas's dark hair and Jora's green skin, his brown eyes and her small tusks. She was beautiful and perfect, and they named her Alina. The town's reaction was mixed. Some people came with gifts and congratulations. Others kept their distance. But Alina was born into a world that was slowly, grudgingly learning to change. Born into a family that loved her fiercely and would fight for her right to exist exactly as she was. As Jora held her daughter for the first time, with Thomas beside her looking awed and terrified and overjoyed all at once, she thought about everything that had led them here. The prejudice and the struggle, the moments when she'd wanted to give up, the times Thomas had refused to let her. The wedding dress that didn't fit, and the husband who'd said she'd wear what fits, meaning not just the dress but her whole life, her whole self. Thomas had made space for her, had built a life where she fit, perfectly and completely. And now they were building that same space for their daughter, creating a world where she could belong. It wasn't easy. It probably never would be, but it was worth it. Love was worth it. Family was worth it. And as Alina opened her eyes for the first time, looking up at her parents with curiosity and trust, Jora knew they'd made the right choice. To stay, to fight, to believe that different didn't mean wrong. To show their daughter and the world that love could bridge any divide. Thomas kissed Jora's forehead, then his daughter's, and whispered, "Welcome to the world, little one. We're going to make it better for you, I promise." And Jora, holding her husband and her child, believed him, because Thomas kept his promises, because they were a team. Because together, they could face anything. 5 years passed, and Alina grew into a bright, curious child who asked 1,000 questions and loved to help her father in the fields. She had a little brother now, Marcus, who was more human in appearance but had his mother's strength. The children played together in the yard of the house that Thomas had expanded twice more, adding rooms and space as the family grew. Thornmere had changed too. It wasn't perfect. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight, but it was better. Alina had friends, both human and the few other half-orc children whose parents had followed Thomas and Jora's example. The town had learned slowly that different families could work, that love came in many forms. Thomas's mother visited regularly now, doting on her grandchildren, making up for lost time. She'd become something of an advocate, actually, speaking out when she heard others expressing prejudice. "My grandchildren are perfect," she'd say firmly. "And if you can't see that, the problem is with you, not them." Jora had found work helping other families in the area, using her strength for building projects and her growing knowledge of farming to assist those who needed it. She was no longer the outcast working at the mill for half wages. She was Jora Mercer, Thomas's wife, Alina and Marcus's mother, a valued member of the community. One autumn evening, as the family sat together at dinner, Alina asked the question Jora had been both expecting and dreading. "Mama, why is my skin different from Papa's?" Jora and Thomas exchanged glances. They discussed how to handle this conversation, had prepared for it. But now that it was here, Jora felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Because your papa is human and I'm an orc," Jora said gently. "You have parts of both of us. That makes you special." "But some kids at school say it makes me weird." Thomas set down his fork, his expression serious but kind. "Some people think different means wrong, but they're mistaken. Different just means different. And you know what? The world needs different. It needs people who can see from more than one perspective, who can understand different ways of living. You're not weird, Alina. You're extraordinary." "Really, really," Jora said, reaching across the table to touch her daughter's hand. "You're smart and strong and kind. You're curious and brave. And yes, you look different from some other children, but that's part of what makes you wonderful." Alina considered this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I think I understand." That night, after the children were in bed, Jora and Thomas sat outside under the stars. "She's going to face challenges," Jora said quietly. "Both of them are, things we can't protect them from." "I know," Thomas said. "But we've given them something important, a foundation of love and acceptance. A belief that they belong exactly as they are. That's more than a lot of children have." "You really think they'll be okay?" "I think they'll be more than okay. I think they'll be amazing." He pulled her close. "Just like their mother." Jora leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body. She thought about that day in the seamstress shop when she'd been too tall for her wedding dress. When she'd felt like she was too much, too big, too wrong for the life she wanted. And she thought about Thomas's response, "Then you'll wear what fits." He'd meant it. Not just about the dress, but about everything. He'd made a space in his life where she fit. had built a world around them, where being different wasn't a failing but a strength, where love mattered more than tradition or prejudice or fear. It hadn't been easy. There had been struggles and setbacks, moments when they'd both wanted to give up, but they hadn't. They'd fought for their love, for their family, for their right to exist exactly as they were, and they'd won, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to build a life together, to raise children, to show the world that different could be beautiful. "Thank you," Jora whispered. "For what? For everything. For seeing me, for choosing me, for making space where I could fit." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "You made space for me too. You taught me what real courage looks like, what real love means. Thank you for not giving up on us, on this town, on our future." They sat together in the darkness, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Jora felt a peace she'd never imagined possible. She'd found her home. Not in a place, but in a person, in a family, in a love that was strong enough to weather any storm. Years later, when Alina was grown and bringing home her own partner, when Marcus was building his own house on land Thomas had given him, when grandchildren were running through the yards and the town of Thornmere had become a place known for its diversity and acceptance, Jora would think back to this moment, to sitting under the stars with Thomas, feeling like she'd finally found where she belonged. And she would remember the wedding dress that didn't fit, and the husband who'd said it didn't matter, who'd found a way to make everything work, who'd loved her not despite her differences, but because of them, who'd seen her as she truly was and decided that was more than enough. That was the real magic, she would think. Not in changing yourself to fit the world, but in finding someone who would help you change the world to fit you. Someone who would fight beside you, believe in you, love you unconditionally. That was what Thomas had given her, and what she'd given him in return, and it was everything. The end of their story wasn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was marked by ordinary days filled with love and laughter, by watching their children grow, by growing old together in the house that Thomas kept expanding, by morning kisses and evening conversations, and the million small moments that made up a life well lived. It was marked by the way Thomas still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, even when her hair was gray and her tusks were chipped and her hands were weathered from years of work. By the way Jora still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her, even after decades of marriage. It was marked by the community they'd built, not just their immediate family but the extended network of humans and orcs and those in between who'd learned from their example, who'd seen that love could bridge any divide, and who'd chosen to build bridges of their own. On their 25th anniversary, the town of Thornmere threw them a celebration. It was held in the same chapel where they'd married in a rush, without guests or ceremony, just two people choosing each other in defiance of a world that said they shouldn't. This time, the chapel was full. Friends and family, neighbors and colleagues, people whose lives Thomas and Jora had touched over the years. Alina and Marcus stood with their own families, beaming with pride. Thomas's mother sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Father Benedict, now ancient but still sharp, stood before them with a smile. 25 years ago, he said, a young man and a young woman came to me with an unusual request. They wanted to marry immediately, without fanfare or celebration. Just two people making vows to each other in faith and love. I agreed because I saw something in them, a determination, a belief in each other that was rare and precious. He looked at Thomas and Jora. I didn't know then what they would accomplish, how they would change this town, this community, for the better, how they would raise children who would carry on their legacy of love and acceptance, how they would show us all that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. "Thomas Jora," Father Benedict continued, "your love has been a gift to all of us. A reminder that the best things in life are worth fighting for. That family isn't defined by how we look, but by how we love. Thank you for your example. Thank you for your courage. And congratulations on 25 years of marriage." The chapel erupted in applause. Thomas and Jora stood together, holding hands, and Jora felt the familiar sting of tears. But these were happy tears, tears of gratitude and joy. After the ceremony, there was a feast in the town square. Music and dancing, laughter and celebration. Alina's children ran around with their cousins, playing games in the fading light. Marcus brought out his guitar and played songs while people sang along. Thomas pulled Jora onto the makeshift dance floor, spinning her in a circle. "Remember our wedding day?" he asked. "Every detail," Jora said. "You swept me off to get married in secret because I was too tall for my dress." "Best decision I ever made," Thomas said, pulling her close. "Though I would have married you even if you'd been twice as tall and wearing a flour sack." "I know," Jora said softly. "You've proven that every day for 25 years. They danced together under the stars, surrounded by the community they'd built, the family they'd created, the love they'd fought for. And Jora thought about how far they'd come from that day in the seamstress's shop, from the moment when she'd felt too big, too wrong, too much for the life she wanted. Thomas had taught her that she was exactly right, exactly enough, exactly perfect, just as she was. And together, they'd built a world where their children and their children's children would never have to feel too much or too different or too wrong. A world where love was celebrated, not condemned. Where families came in all forms and all were valued. It was the world Thomas had promised her, all those years ago on a bridge in Thornmere. A world they'd created together, one day, one choice, one act of love at a time. As the celebration continued around them, Thomas leaned in and whispered in her ear, "I love you, Jora Mercer. Today, tomorrow, and always." "I love you too," Jora whispered back. "Thank you for making me fit." "Thank you for choosing to stay," Thomas replied, "for fighting for us, for believing we could make this work." They stood together in the middle of the town square, holding each other, and Jora felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was her life, her family, her home, and it was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. The Orc bride had been too tall for her wedding dress, but her husband had said she'd wear what fits, and he'd meant it. He'd meant that she would wear confidence, love, acceptance. That she would wear her differences proudly, as strengths rather than flaws. That she would fit perfectly and completely into a life they'd build together, and she had. They both had, and it was beautiful.